There you go.
You want to mute. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Mute those speakers so they're not there. All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here. Welcome. My name is Becky Sims. I am with RCAP Solutions. I'm the New York State manager. We have a couple different topics on our agenda here tonight, all really related to understanding and protecting well water. So I'll be doing some talking here first, or introduce everybody, and then Linda is going to share a little bit about the town's drinking water source protection plan and what the committee's been working on. I'm going to talk about private well and septic system basics, heavy on the private well, little bit of septic. Then also we have some information about a survey that was done town-wide last year in 2024, and that was part of what led to some community sampling being done around the town. Over 50 wells were sampled, and so we have Braden and Patrick here from New York State Department of Health to talk about those sampling results. And then we have two additional presenters here from our local water and septic resources, Grayson from Community Science Institute and Doug from Tompkins County Environmental Health. So thanks everyone for being here. To get us started, I want to turn it over to Linda to just talk a little bit about the town's drinking water source protection plan.
Okay. Let me make sure I get near the microphones, so to speak. Okay, so I'm Linda Little, and I'm the chairperson of the town's water source protection planning committee, or the water committee, which is what we usually are known by. The Ulysses residents and businesses rely on differing sources for their drinking water supply, including individual groundwater wells, direct withdrawal from Kego Lake, municipal water, the Bolton Point, or the village of Trumansburg. To proactively plan for the protection of our drinking water resources and to plan for future needs and funding opportunities, the town board organized and appointed the Water Source Protection Plan Committee, or the Water Committee. And it's a bunch of volunteers with a lot of knowledge on water, and they're all from the town. This committee has been working for about 2 years now with technical specialists from New York Rural Water Association to develop a drinking water source protection plan for the town of Ulysses, and this includes the town outside of the village of Trumansburg. The plan, we are using a framework that was developed by New York State DEC under their what they call the DWSP2 program initiative. There's a lot of abbreviations in this. The water committee is advisory to the town board, who in the end will make the final decision on adopting the drinking water source protection plan that the water committee comes up with. The plan will define the water supply source resources for the town and identify existing and potential issues with quality and quantity. It will include draft recommendations for measures to provide future protection of those resources. This project dovetails with what's currently going on with the Town of Ulysses Comprehensive Plan. Water resources are critical consideration for land use planning and sustainability to the future, particularly as our area experiences and must adapt to increasing impacts of climate change on ground and surface waters. The DWSP2, or the plan, will develop an overview of the water systems, prepare a drinking water source protection map, create potential contaminant source inventory, identify protection and management methods, and develop a timeline. A key initial step for the whole process for the water committee was to develop and deliver a survey to the town residents designed to collect important information on current condition of Ulysses water resources and how they are used. A discussion on the results of the survey is going to be included in the agenda a little later on. Throughout this process, the Water Committee was assisted by several organizations. The New York Rural Water Association is a statewide membership organization that assists smaller communities and systems to comply with the complex regulations and to protect public health and environment by offering technical assistance and specialized trainings. Their federally funded Source Water Protection Program, keyword probably federally funded, provides free technical assistance to communities across New York with the development and implementation of local drinking water source protection plans. RCAP Solutions is a network of regional nonprofit organizations that provide technical assistance and training to help small rural communities throughout the Northeast to address their drinking water, wastewater, and community development needs and building capacity. And then the New York State Department of Health provided Ulysses with a team of experts to perform in-depth water testing on a limited sampling of wells across the town. Based on this testing data, they assisted us in our drinking water and quality assessments. So where does the Water Committee stand right now? The Water Committee is in the final stages of drafting the plan, our WSBP. Our intention is to deliver the plan to the town board within the next month for their review, upgrades, and acceptance for submission to the New York State DEC. At this time, once it's accepted by the town board, we will begin reviewing the plan with the comp plan steering team so that the information is incorporated in that process as well. So that's where we stand. Drafting the plan takes a lot of work and effort and coordination, but we're on our way, slowly but surely. Okay. So next is, you back,
Yep.
right?
Thank you, Linda. Thanks. And yeah, that project has been underway for what, about 2 years now. Yeah, and there's been a lot of really good, yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing
The
where
plan,
that-
so
yeah. Great. All right. Well, Linda gave actually a pretty nice little introduction there for RCAP, but so if you're wondering who I'm with, RCAP is the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. So we're a national network of nonprofit organizations that are organized regionally. So RCAP Solutions is in the purple there. We serve the entire Northeast, plus New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the US Caribbean. Sadly, I only stay in the state of New York and not in the Caribbean. As was mentioned, we are federally funded, so the funding that's able to support the private well work that we do comes from the US EPA and is not getting eliminated anytime soon, as far as I understand it. There's a small team of 5 of us here in New York. There we are, Candace, she's based in the Hudson Valley. I'm here just over in the town of Enfield. Catherine's out in Western New York. Jesse's in the capital region, and so is Adam, who does our GIS work. So a lot of the projects we do are with small communities that have municipal water systems or wastewater systems. That's part of the work that was done for this survey that I'll tell you a little bit more about. But we all get involved in a bunch of different types of projects, but we also do private well support. So this is one of the programs that falls under that. I think you all have the agenda here for today. The clicker did this. So we'll get right down to it. Why, right? Why test and protect your well? Well, wells are not regulated. And that's I think an important difference, right, between private wells and something like a municipal water supply. Like, you know, if you turn on the sink over here, it's coming from the village of Trumansburg, right? That's a regulated water supply. And one of the reasons that's regulated, right, is because people like us can walk in and turn on the sink and drink the water, right? And so if that's going to be the case, there needs to be some kind of provision that that's going to be safe and acceptable drinking water. Private wells, on the other hand, you're really on your own, right? And there's advantages and disadvantages to that. But because they are not regulated, it's really up to the owner exclusively to make sure that that water is safe for drinking and maintain that system properly. That has mixed outcomes, right? I mean, well water can be really fantastic and require little to no treatment at all and be perfectly safe and maybe even have a good, good taste and odor and not wreck your appliances. On the other hand, it can be full of contaminants that might not be noticeable from a visual or an odor or a taste, right? Some of those contaminants are, and we'll talk more about that, but some of the, something like coliform or E. coli, could make you very sick very quickly, right? You wouldn't know that's in your water unless you're testing it. So advantages and disadvantages here. The best way to protect your water supply and your family and the people that rely on it, right, is to sample your water and take care of your well. So if you walk away with 3 things that I want you to know about how to protect and manage your water supply, these are those 3 things. So first, knowing the natural water quality of the aquifer, the water source that you're using, right? So there are naturally occurring contaminants that exist in aquifers, and not because there's been a spill, right? Not because there's been some kind of human intervention, right? They're just naturally existing in the geology and in that aquifer. And so we'll be hearing more about those particular contaminants later, arsenic being one of them. You will have to treat for that, right? And you will know that through testing. Finding an alternative water source can be really difficult. So treatment is often a first line of defense. The second thing is understanding how your well might be influenced by surface sources. So what's happening on the source is going to impact what's happening in the well. You want to have a good understanding of what those potential sources of contamination are. This is something you're doing town-wide, right, for the Drinking Water Source Protection Plan, right, is looking at potential sources of contamination. So you do that on a micro scale for an individual private well. And the third thing is to ensure that your well is properly constructed so that your drinking water is protected right at the source. Properly constructed, cased, and sealed, I would say, too. And this will help protect the well in cases of something like a flood or a spill or some sort of event that could possibly contaminate the well if it's not properly constructed and sealed. So I mentioned natural geology. I am not a hydrogeologist. This is not a class on geology, but I will share a few key points that relate to how that relates to your water supply. So geology, right? That's the rocks that are under us, and the soil that's beneath the ground surface. So depending what's in there, right, is going to influence how permeable that soil is above your water supply. So the more permeable it is, the faster and more easily water can move through those spaces in the rock and the soil. Impermeable, like much of the soil around here is full of clay, right? It tends to shed on the surface, which present other problems, right? Potentially for surface runoff or flooding. So it's not like one is better or worse than the other, right? They each have different characteristics that can influence how contamination moves around the water supply. The type of well and also its construction will influence, and its depth, of course, so to what kind of water-bearing layer it's drawing from, that's going to influence the water quality. And so you might see a case where you have 2 wells that are like not far away from each other on the ground surface, but depending on their depth and their construction, maybe collecting very different water. These are just a few examples of that. To show permeability and how it is influenced by the underlying material, right? So gravel up at the top, I'm going to push the right button, yay. Oh, it can't shine a laser pointer on the screen. Look at that. So the gravel is the biggest pieces, so they have the biggest spaces, right? And then this is like your bedrock, right? Which is very, very tight, and water only travels through fissures, right? That's kind of your wide range. So you go from highly permeable to least permeable. Here are a few other examples of how that water may be distributed in those types of formations. So the one at the top here, sand and gravel aquifer. Does anybody know if they have a water supply in a sand and gravel aquifer? You probably didn't see too many of those in your sampling, did you? Yeah, it's more common around here to have a bedrock well as a drilled well. And there's things that are in between. But basically with the sand and gravel aquifer, it's kind of soft, right? It's very permeable. So the water is able to exist in a more of a pool-like fashion as opposed to a bedrock well, which we're getting water in all these little cracks and fissures. So I want to keep that in mind here as we move to the subsequent slides that relate to construction. So these are a couple different examples. These are all drilled wells. That really is, any modern water supply is a drilled well. And I'll show you some photos of things that are not ideal, that are not drilled wells later on. But you can see there's a casing extending above the ground with a little green cap, and then the black part represents casing, that steel casing, right? That pipe you see sticking out of the ground. So in a sand and gravel aquifer, you're going to go down into that water supply, right, into the aquifer, and then you're going to screen the bottom of that well. It's not going to be an open hole, it's going to be screened. And the reason for that, right, is so that you don't get sand and gravel in your well. The size of screen and everything will depend on what's found during the well drilling. In the middle here, we see something a little bit different, where it is ultimately going to be a bedrock well, but it's traveling through quite a bit of sand and gravel to get there. Looks like there just wasn't any water in that sand and gravel, right? So they came down to this water-bearing rock formation where it can be collected through the fissures, and then this is open for quite a ways down, right? So way past the casing, and that's because you got to get water from all those different places. There's not as much as there would be potentially in the sand and gravel aquifer. And then this third one here, I know, like my well at home, right? This is more characteristic of what that looks like, where there's a bit of some permeable soil, but then pretty quickly it gets into bedrock. And so in that case, you're going to do casing, at least 20 feet, potentially can go more than that. And then the bottom of that hole is actually open, right? As opposed to having a screen on it, like it would in a sand and gravel aquifer. So if there's questions, just pop up, raise your hand. So this is just a closer view of a bedrock well. Again, I think it's most likely if you live around here and you have a drilled well, but this is how it's been constructed, hopefully. One other thing I'll point out about this is up here, you see you have a pitless adapter. And so what that is that's going to take your water from your sump pump down here, your submersible pump, all the way up the pipe. And then rather than bringing a water pipe above the ground in New York State, you send it underground, right? Using a pitless adapter. You used to have a well pit to do this, right? That's why wells were in pits, so you could do this underground. But we've advanced. So now you can send a pitless adapter underground under the frost line to the home where it would enter a pressure tank. And so all these little fractures, right, are going to be getting that water that's eventually going to be pulled up through that well. One big difference between bedrock wells and sand and gravel wells is that area of influence that of what's happening on the surface that could impact the water supply is a lot bigger. So that's just something to keep in mind. Also, though, it takes longer to get there. So again, it's not like one is better or worse. They're different. They present different risks and different advantages. Just another diagram here to show the sand and gravel. Its construction is basically the same. You still have your pitless adapter, but then down here, it would be screened instead of having it be open. Anybody ever seen one of these? So this is a well drilling log. This is what well drillers in New York State need to complete and submit to the DEC every time a well is drilled. These records began being required in the year 2000. Shockingly recently, in my opinion. Also 25 years ago. That's hard to think about, but yeah, the point is that there are a lot of wells out there we don't know really much about at all. And that's one of the potential risks to your water supply, right? And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you do have a well drilling log, it's either hopefully on file with the DEC or with your local health department, perhaps, maybe with code enforcement, if there were like building permits happening, and it may not exist at all. I grabbed really a random one off of this website. So this website has the anything that has been submitted to the state DEC, it's available through their online mapper. So you can go and browse for your own home and see if it's online there, and then you can download it. This one is pretty good because it's actually filled out. I've seen a lot of these with very little helpful information on them, and I know that some of you have as well. But what they're telling you here basically is where is it, right? GPS coordinates. What is it? Well, it's a drilled well and it's 6 inches in diameter and went down to 80 feet, but you got groundwater at 70 feet. This is telling you the different formations that they drilled through on the way there. And so that's how you would learn, is it a screened well? What kind of formation is it going into? They should also be doing this is for a yield test. So that's how much water can be pumped from the well in like a gallons per minute kind of measurement. This case, they did a test for 1 hour. You're supposed to do it for 4, but you know. And got 14 gallons a minute. So that's pretty good. All right, so that's kind of well construction for us here. Now let's take a look at water quality and quantity. So your water quality characteristics are abundant. Who has water they are unhappy with? Right, I have sulfur water. I have hard water. Yeah, what do you got?
Hard water.
Yeah, hard water. I mean, it's I think pretty rare to find a well that doesn't have like something that, you know, it could be treated for, certainly. So there's kind of 2 classes of things that you might want to treat your water for, water quality characteristics. One is are things that present a health concern, right? And those really are a priority. Those are the things that are regulated most strictly in public water supplies. And then there are things that are more of like nuisances, right? Which are very real and can affect your quality of life, which I might argue can affect somebody's health, right? But in general, these sort of nuisance problems like hardness, right? Well, it wrecks your appliances and it leaves these weird white stains on things. And then you have to use extra soap and like, it is annoying, right? But it's not going to hurt you. If you're drinking this water, you're not going to have health impacts. Same goes with something like sulfur, right? Hydrogen sulfide, it smells bad, right? That is a problem, but it's not going to harm you, right? We're breathing hydrogen sulfide gas in a little bit right now. It's not going to harm you in that way, but may present other challenges that are very much worthwhile to investigate some kind of treatment. One of the main concerns with private wells, and especially because private wells often coexist on properties with septic systems, untreated wastewater contains pathogens. Pathogens include E. coli or Giardia. E. coli only exists in the gut of warm-blooded animals. Okay, so if there's E. coli in a water supply, it is from the gut of a warm-blooded animal. That can present immediate and potentially very severe health risks, right? So that's a big one. Giardia also can exist in untreated wastewater. I would say less common of a contaminant. More of a concern if there's potential surface water influencing that water supply, which definitely is the case for wells around here, or water supplies along the lake. So taking a look at how contaminants may move through that soil, one thing I want you to think about is like difference between uphill and up gradient. Usually those might be interchangeable, but what this picture can point out is that something that's uphill, well, let's see, this spot over here where the contamination is coming from is actually lower in elevation, right, than this water supply as well. But because it's down gradient, right, the overall slope is kind of undulating a little bit, that can still influence this water supply. Right, so you want to think about both of those things. In general, they are often the same, right? But you want to look at that big picture, look at the landscape, right? Maybe not just in the backyard. Thinking about common threats that can affect your water supply, this is more or less of kind of a checklist that you can think about to do a quick overview of where there might be concerns. So starting with the well itself, the hardware, is the well cap tight? Is it sealed? Is the electrical connection tight? Is that sealed? Is there any way that anything, even like spiders, could get inside your well? Okay, because if they can, then it's likely that that well will test positive for coliform. Coliform is a bigger group of bacteria, of which inside of that exists fecal coliform, and then inside of that exists E. coli, right? So coliform is used as an indicator of well contamination. Is not considered safe for drinking if coliform is present. It can sometimes be easily treated, and sometimes it may be really persistent. Thinking about that well cap, I've got a couple pictures that'll really demonstrate that point. Again, septic system, right? Unfortunately, our own septic systems or our neighbor septic systems can be the most likely cause of contamination for our own water supply. So that's definitely something you want to be mindful of, and also be thinking about it being in good working condition. So activities that are happening on the surface, that's a big influencer on the water supply. So I talked about septic systems, right? They can not only contain pathogens, pathogenic bacteria, right, but could have, depending on how people are using and abusing that system, you might be throwing, heavy duty cleaners, household chemicals. I know there's a lot of information that's being shared more readily about, PFAS and the persistence of those chemicals in things like personal care products or soaps. So it's, I would say, probably a certainty that there's PFAS in your wastewater in a septic system, right? And so these things may stay really tight on your property, or they may travel farther. Again, it depends on that geology and right how your water cycle, how big it is, and where it's going. Things like lawn and garden chemicals can be a factor, or manure, if that's being spread. Livestock, if you have livestock at home, you're going to definitely want to keep animals and their waste away from your well. Garbage can attract animals, but can also contain hazardous materials. Pet waste can really, it really can add up and potentially impact a well. I have seen that happen. And then, of course, there's things like, automotive or things that may have happened on the land before you got there, right? But that could still be influencing. So potentially, and if there was an old spill of any kind or some old activity that could be still impacting the water supply. We'll play a little game here. There's a well in this well house. What's the problem?
The junkyard.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some junk out there in there. Yeah.
And it's on higher ground.
Yeah, the position on the landscape is a little troubling here, right? I don't know if you can tell from where you're sitting, but like that's water, right? That's standing water. So this is an area that floods, right? This is not an area where you want to be drawing water from, right? Because that's going to be heavily influenced by surface water. It looks like there's probably some animal activity. I don't know, these barrels are like not giving me confidence over there. So this well, and it's also in a pit, which we're not seeing the inside of the pit, but I would put money on it not being in like good sanitary condition. All right, this one is a little trickier to tell, but there's that little stub at the top of our well. What could be the problem? Right?
In a barnyard.
Yeah, so there's some animals, there's a burn pile, there's again some like barrels that we don't know what's in them. And that's all like right on top of where the wellhead is. I mean, it's also uphill, but it's right there. So these are the types of activities you really want to avoid near and around, and especially uphill with your water supply. It's also like important to be respectful and like aware of how we are impacting people that might not be on our property too, right? Depending on the size of your property and the density of your neighborhood, that is really could be really more of a community issue. And that can be harder to address, right? Yeah, so here we go. So these are the well caps that we want to replace because they're not in good condition. So that little checklist I gave you earlier with like how to assess threats to your well, start with your well cap. I really would start with your well cap. This is an older style well cap. You can see that it's not really sealed on. The electrical conduit is open. This is a different well. So these first two are the same. This third one is a different unacceptable well, but that's a mouse nest,
No,
right? In your well, and this is not, I would say it's common, it's not unheard of. I've seen this on more than one occasion. And yeah, that's a great way to get E. coli in your water supply, right? I just think that visual really goes a long way. But the good news, right, is that there can be a solution, right? It doesn't have to be like this. And the solution is actually not a heavy lift in a lot of ways. Before I leave this, though, I want to point out what's wrong with this. A couple things. One is it's probably only maybe an inch or two out of the ground, right? So that doesn't give you a lot of protection from spills or flooding or things that are happening on the surface. I don't know if that was maybe they ran it over with a tractor or something, like it got crushed. So the casing is actually now damaged, and so is the conduit. So, and that was the cap, right? So there's not really much good happening in that photo. So what do you do, right? Well, so I'm sorry, there's some good solutions out there, right? The construction codes have changed a lot. Like I said, now we have records, right? And standards, and that's good. But for these older water supplies, which you may have, you could be left with a real challenge. So I think there's really in my mind, two major areas of concern with substandard constructed wells. One, obviously, is contamination entering directly into the well, right? That's an obvious problem. But they're also a safety hazard, and that is more clear with the slide after this. So this is really what you want wells to look like. It's not the same one I showed you before, but this is called a sanitary sealing well cap. So what do we love about this? Well, it could be sticking higher out of the ground. You wanted at least a foot of casing. Higher is better. Well, to a point. This cap comes in two pieces, right? And it allows the electrical conduit to come up and be completely sealed inside of there. So there's no spiders are getting, right? And then there's a gasket that goes around it and then you tighten your bolts in the corners one at a time to seal that together to make it just a very tight seal. And what you'll also see is what you can't see from here, but under next to the conduit, there's a little screen on that cap so that air can still flow, but it's screened, right? So that spiders and mice, and all those other things don't go in there. What do you say? You can get one of these $50 or less. Many people can install them themselves. You do need to have basic comfort with cutting electrical wires and putting them back together. So if that's not something you're comfortable with, you absolutely shouldn't do that. And you can pay somebody not a whole lot of money to come help you with this, right? This is a really, I would say, easy, cheap, low-hanging fruit solution. It may not totally solve your problem. But if you don't have a sanitary sealing well cap, please consider getting one very soon. Best thing you can do. I mentioned extending the casing. This is a bit of a heavier lift, right? This person is going to be welding some casing to extend this further out of the ground. This was formerly in a pit, you can kind of tell there, but they got rid of the pit and are bringing everything up above the ground surface. So I mentioned safety hazards, right? This is a dug well. Does anybody have a dug well at home? Is it in use? Okay. And how is it covered?
we have it's got a concrete pad around it, and they've got a concrete case over it, lid over it all.
Okay, yeah, and it's probably this big or so? Yeah.
Well, actually, the well is actually not very big. It's hard to get in. I don't know how they actually dug it, but that's what it looks like. But the case over it is much larger. I mean,
Okay.
It types force.
Good.
Of multiple pieces.
Good. So no one's falling in your well. Good. People do fall in wells like this. Usually if there's a nice old plywood covering on it, right? And that's horrible, and we don't want that to happen. People can die. So in addition to being really susceptible to contamination from the surface, it can also present safety risks. So if this is, and this can be a conduit to contamination to your freshly drilled well. So if you have one of these, you're like, oh, let's drill a well, and we drill a well over here, but you leave this one open, I mean, that's like turning the heat on in the winter and open the windows. I mean, it's not gonna do you any good. Contamination can still get in here and it's connected to your same water supply. All right, so I want to move over to some things as it relates to your septic system, right? Because I mentioned how your septic system can be the potentially biggest source of contamination for a private well. So water cycle, right? We've learned about this at some point in our lives. There's a water cycle that takes water, right, ground, the air, liquid, all that. So you have, it's probably hard to see from back there. But what this is showing, right, is how there are different types of activities happening on the surface, including wells that are drilled, right, and some septic systems, and the lake, wetlands, city water supply, all sorts of stuff. Want to think about how big that water cycle is and where that water is actually going to be going after it has become wastewater and is leaving your home. We want, to the extent possible, to treat that wastewater properly, right? So that when it is returned back to the water cycle, it is not bringing a lot of contamination with it. So for septic systems, I'll just leave you with a couple notes on that. And I know Doug has some more information that he'll share with us later. But in brief, your septic system is going to consist of, I would say, 3 primary components. One is the collection system in your house. So that's just your pipes, right? Pipes in your house and the sewer line leaving your house. That's going to go into a septic tank, which is kind of the second component of your system. The septic tank is designed to separate solids from water. It's if on like the municipal scale, right? If you go to a wastewater treatment plant, they'll have like settling basins or something like that, right? Or they might do something completely different, but that does exist at the municipal scale. Same idea. You want the solids to settle out. You want the liquid to stay on the top, and only have liquid leaving that tank. So modern tanks now have 2 sides, dual chamber. There's a little wall in the middle. That additionally helps keep the solids on the front end of the tank, but you will still get some in the second chamber. So then the third part of a system is going to be that soil dispersal, treatment and dispersal into the soil. That is designed and installed in a bunch of different ways. Around here, there's a lot of sand filter systems with some sort of downstream treatment or downstream trench involved, but there may just be sort of a standard, there's so many words, leach field, drain field, tile field. People will say these words but mean lots of different things with them, so I'll just do the same thing. But that, what all of those things are referring to, right, is the part of the system after the septic tank where there's perforated pipes that are allowing that wastewater, hopefully it's only the effluent without any solids, to be treated by the soil and then returned back into the soil, returned back into the water cycle. And when that is treated properly, that's great and presents really little to no risk. If the system's not designed properly, installed properly, being managed properly, right, there's all sorts of things that can go wrong that will result in wastewater not be totally treated by soil before it's eventually returned back to the water cycle. Okay, so this diagram kind of shows that it's a bit bigger, simpler version of that bigger water cycle one I showed you a minute ago, right? But same idea, right? You've got your collection system into your tank, then out of your tank into some sort of field that's going to return that water, treated wastewater, hopefully back into the groundwater, eventually to the lake. All right, so before closing, I just want to, passing on to the next presenter, just offer a few resources that the RCAP network is involved in that may be of interest. Has anybody ever heard of or taken the private well class? Yeah, great, thanks. It's great. So the way that it works is it's like a self-paced class. You sign up online and then they email you like 1 lesson per week, but you can also go and like do them all at once if you want to. And there's 10 lessons and you kind of do it on your own, but then they also offer a lot of resources and webinars periodically that are live, and then you can, talk to people and in real time online, and then have access to all of these great resources. These are the 10 lessons. They're each, I would say, like about an hour of time. But some of it gets into a lot of detail. So it may be more information than you're interested in, but it is a ton of really good information. And like I said, it's self-paced, so you can kind of pick and choose. But that's a good resource. And the other thing I wanted to mention, of course, is the well assessment program. So RCAP Solutions, or everyone in the RCAP network, has a program where we do well assessments. And so what that is come out to a property that's relying on a private water supply, a well, and do basically what's called a sanitary survey of that water supply. So it's going in a lot of detail to the stuff I sort of briefly went over here today, of doing a threat assessment, taking a look at what's in place, evaluating any treatment systems or other things that may be there, identifying any opportunities for contamination, and then making recommendations for best management for that water supply. We do often do a little bit of sampling with those well assessments, and this is a totally free program and service. So if you or your neighbors or anybody you know might be interested, please just feel free to contact me. We do these all over the state, and it's a really great program. I really enjoy it. All right, so with that, I can take questions. We did budget a little bit of time for a short break.
And we have pizza.
And we have pizza. Yeah, let's take a little pizza break and come back and.
Before it gets too cold.
Yeah. Yeah. How's that sound? Come back is 5 minutes, 10 minutes. How folks feeling? Yeah. Great.
Hey, I have a notification on my laptop. I have it on here. Oh, you do? Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, you're
Sounds
good. Yep. And now I plug my computer in. You changed it.
I think one would change, but it's fine.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Well, I will.
Yeah.
No, like it's from, a little bit. Oh,
Family and friends.
Yeah, yeah. In general. Yeah.
Or 75 see, but there's no force component.
Yeah.
Functionally doesn't do it yet, but technically.
So, where you.
Technically.
We had all.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah.
You
have to think about it.
It is.
Well, training. What you
Basics.
Spring that system. And so it's just
one of those. What about I see? I know.
Yes.
But.
Yeah, yeah, I shouldn't say anything.
It's, I'm always.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So I
Right.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah.
But the water nuggets for your.
Always had a little. Lights. And.
We have a.
And she had.
Oh, okay, that's not a walk. So that would-
There is a.
Oh, so. It's a court. And right.
There was a. Now I can't. Next to the name. Yeah. So. Oh, that was sad.
So what do you get out?
She likes that.
And so we have.
Oh, yes.
So.
And I.
Yeah. Well, I had a nephew that's.
So like, back to.
They don't live in. They live in California. They'll be. They'll.
Yes.
You
I have no.
know, they're trying to get it.
But.
They hope that-
So.
my God.
So,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, we put it.
But then you could go, if you go four properties down.
And so, they know.
Well, have a nice.
I mean, I think there's a.
Certainly, this is not San Diego. They like some.
Fire. Yeah.
And so.
I was.
They lived in.
That makes sense when you're active.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they're close.
Everyone about that.
I always got Virginia. That they now. Like that was an entire, was like. Yeah.
Yeah. It's usually.
Yeah.
Just for him. Yeah, like that here. Yeah, so that they.
And.
Yeah. But the church was.
But it was still all. I don't know.
That's about it.
Yeah, I see. And so, we talked to we were looking at everything. Yeah.
I guess my favorite.
There's nothing. Single day.
She lost.
I'm not sure if they're allowed.
So with this, we're just like.
How can get in the ocean? The last 2 years.
You know that? By the way.
So, but any of our people have done it, like the last sale, they want.
Right.
It's in the.
Well, that's up.
I work in the great. We share. I'm not sharing. So they have the choice to offer. In their own way.
I think they have.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's all. So they always end up teaching. Last one, and lawyers. And then it's like.
Oh, wow.
Treatment.
Yeah.
It's like.
Here, I'll get you from my card, yeah. Here's my card, so if you're interested in that, I'm not sure you can-
You have.
And so.
Yeah.
This skill development also.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's. Well, but anything that's like, wow. That's. Yeah. Yeah. Right, all right, so we can go ahead and start back up here. Good pizza. They don't feel bad.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Oh, really?
All right, so. I'm gonna talk briefly here about the survey that was done in the town of Ulysses, and then turn it over to some of our other presenters here. So there, I guess it was, starting at in 2023 and then through 2024, the town of Ulysses and the Water Source Protection Committee, as Linda was describing, is doing a drinking water source protection plan. And so in order to inform what's going into that plan, the town was really interested in collecting information from residents about their drinking water. And so the town reached out to RCAP, and we kind of did manage the survey portion of things, collecting the responses and processing them for the town. And so that was sent townwide. So this was the town of Ulysses minus the village of Trumansburg. Was sent out a postcard mailer with an online survey link to about 1,300 property owners. There were 28 questions, and we had it mostly online. There were a few paper surveys that came in. And it was open for about 12 weeks. So people had a good chance to respond. We got a ton of responses. It was like more than 348 households responded. So, which just is really a fabulous return on for something like an online survey with 28 questions, right? So that was really great. And they were well distributed across the town. So it presented a really good opportunity to learn more about people's water supplies and the stuff that's going on. So can you see the stuff on the chart here? Should I describe it? Yeah. So I'm going to present a summary of some of the highlights of the results from that survey. It's not all 28 questions. So one of the things we looked at was water source, right? We've been talking about wells, obviously, here tonight. And that is where most folks get their drinking water from. This second one is bottled water. So this means that for any reason, right, those residents are choosing to get bottled water. They may have a well, or they may have a public water supply connection, or a spring, or a beach well, or whatever it may be, right? But for whatever reason, are not using that as a drinking water source. And that's about 25% of the respondents to the survey. That surprised me. That's a lot of folks that are not comfortable or able to drink the water that's coming out of the tap. To me, that's worth some further attention. So we looked at those well logs, right, that are only on file for the last 25 years. The survey asked people about the depth of their well, if they knew when it was constructed. The takeaway from this is that there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of unknowns. That was really the most common response by a lot. And that, right, so after 2000, right, that's when those well logs started. And that was 18% of people. You might know your depth of your well because you had to replace the well pump. That's one way to find out, right? Or at least then you know the depth to where the pump is going, not necessarily at the bottom of your well. We also asked about water quantity, and this I think was also a pretty important finding, which was that 13% of respondents said that they do not always have enough drinking water. So the quantity or the yield was not adequate, at least for parts of the year. And so that's definitely an area of concern. Water quality, this was self-rating, right? But how would you rate the overall quality of your untreated water, right? There was a nice little bell curve there. I don't think this is particularly surprising, but you know, it's important to note that a significant number of folks are saying that their water quality is like fair or worse. It's not great. But it is important also to note that there's a good chunk of people that have good water. They say it's excellent, right? And that's important. We talked about many of these contaminants, and we'll be hearing more about those with the sampling results as well. But no surprise here, right? A lot of hardness, iron, sulfur, odor, bad taste. Those are the biggest types of problems. Bacteria came here at 16%. So again, that's something you really only know about through testing. So spoiler alert, there's more than 16% have issues with bacteria. So another thing we looked at, right, is treatment and cost, right? So if your untreated water is fair or poor, very poor, has these other issues, right, you may be treating it at home, and that's going to have a cost associated with it. If you're not treating your water and you're purchasing your drinking water elsewhere, right, that also has a cost with it. So we wanted to find out how much are people spending to be able to maintain a safe and acceptable drinking water supply. The average cost annually was $404. 11% of respondents reported spending more than $1,000 a year. And this was kind of for those ongoing costs, not the capital investment, right? So if you've ever bought a water treatment system, right, that upfront cost is a ton, but then your ongoing cost is a lot less. When it came to capital costs, we also asked about that. Half of the respondents reported a major investment in the last 10 years. So with 3 people reporting spending more than $25,000 to make a capital investment for their water supply. So that's really significant. That's how many years of a public water supply would that get you? Right? I mean, that's a lot. So that brings us to asking about municipal water, right? So if you have areas where there are widespread issues with water quality, quantity, people are having to spend a lot on treatment, their wells are running dry, municipal water supply could be a reasonable option. And it could be something that's, you know, welcomed, right, by people in that area. And there's, I'd say, fair amount of interest here among respondents to the survey in terms of having access to a municipal water supply. Also ask people, how much would you be willing to pay to access that service, right? Because that's where the rubber hits the road. If you're going to install new water line, there's going to be that capital cost. There's going to be that ongoing operation and maintenance that needs to be affordable and approvable by the folks that are going to be part of that municipal water system. We saw people, you know, really would love to pay like $1,000 or less was where the most interest was, which is not unheard of, right? So there's plenty of municipal water customers out there that are paying less than $1,000 per year. And there's definitely folks that are paying more than that. But what we saw here is that about 60% are either somewhat or very interested in accessing a municipal water supply. So the last thing we took a look at was concerns. And we've talked about a couple of these things already, but there was a whole litany of potential concerns or potential sources of contamination. And the town wanted to know, you know, how concerned or are you concerned about these things? I think it was quite telling. About half of the responses, there are 149 of them, said that they were concerned about manure and or fertilizer storage or manure applications. I know that's something we've seen, I think, an increasing amount of over the last 5, definitely 10 years in this area, right? Drought and flood were a close second in terms of concern. So these are things that people are thinking about, right? You have a private water supply. These are things that are on your mind for almost half of the folks in town here. Other potential concerns, right? Septic systems is here. So there's, you know, some concern there. Harmful algal blooms, definitely if your water supply is influenced by Cayuga Lake or is Cayuga Lake, that's going to be a pretty big concern as well. Right. If there's any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to conclude my portion of the presentation and turn it over to Braden and Patrick from New York State Department of Health. Thanks. This came from Martin, so I hope it's what you need.
I think it's, yeah, that's right.
Okay. Let's get the screen sharing set up here for you. Okay, it's in presenter mode and this works.
Great.
Does that work for you?
Yeah. Okay, hey, hello, everyone. I'm Braden Savage from the New York State Department of Health. That's Patrick O'Connor. We work in the Bureau of Water Supply Protection in the Water Systems Control and Analysis section. Just before I start, is anyone here from the town of Enfield? All the Ulysses folks? Nope.
Me.
All right. So just a quick overview of the work we did in Ulysses and Enfield. We sampled wells to provide data for usually for some source water protection plans, sometimes just because the town was interested in knowing more about the groundwater quality. Sampled 51 wells here in Ulysses over, I think it was 2 years. And in Enfield, we sampled 23 wells. When we collect samples for this project, we tend to try to sample directly from the pressure tank. And that's because we want to try to get the clearest representation we can of groundwater quality. And then if there's any issues with that, it's a lot easier for you to know what you should be sampling for. If there was anything that was out of range, what you should keep an eye on. Because some of these tests, especially this that we do, is pretty comprehensive. And that usually means it is a little bit more expensive. So if you have an idea, if we sample it and it comes back high in arsenic, but everything else was okay, then you know maybe you have to keep a closer eye on arsenic and sample for that every year, ideally with bacteria. But yeah, I think yeah, we did sample for sulfate. So here is a big table of all the results that we had, just average from Ulysses and Enfield. And then in this far right column is where these are recommended limits. It's from a whole bunch of different sources because, as Becky had said, there isn't any regulation for private wells in New York. So I bolded the rows where, on average, the average result from all the wells in Ulysses and Enfield was higher than the recommended limit. And as Becky had said, hardness is just a prevailing issue in these bedrock wells. All the dissolved carbonates from the bedrock get in that water, and then you get reduced like soap and detergent efficiency in those hard water spots. And in Ulysses, we saw a lot of iron, which is we don't usually see iron results like this high. So that's just another concern for the town. And there's it gets interesting too later on because we tend to see arsenic occur when there's a lot of iron too. And in Ulysses, we saw they weren't high levels, but we saw a lot of arsenic detections in the town. So that's just another concern for well owners in the town. You should probably keep a closer eye on arsenic. We also saw odor, but that's just probably related to sulfates and iron because you can smell those when they're really high. Other than that, the turbidity, that's just like a measure of particulate matter in the water. That's probably related to the iron as well. So this is a count. So here we have a count and then a percentage of the wells. So this is a count of wells in each town that were in excess of the recommended limits from the slide before. So, and then this column on the right, all the way to the right, is kind of like a estimation of a statewide average from all the wells that we personally have sampled across New York State. So that kind of gives you a baseline that you can compare a town to. So you can see Ulysses, 66% of the wells that we sampled were positive for coliform, that's a lot higher than we tend to see because around the state, you can see 40% of wells were positive for coliform. So coliform seems to be a more prevalent issue in this town than we see generally. There's also a lot of iron, like I had mentioned, the 41% of wells were in excess of that 0.3 milligrams per liter limit. What else? I mean, turbidity. Some of those limits are more aesthetic concerns. So this is a little, it makes it seem a little worse than it is. But the iron in MN1, that's iron and manganese, and it's just a weird rule for public water systems. When they both are in the sample, then they shouldn't exceed 0.5 milligrams per liter. And we do tend to see iron and manganese co-occur too. But manganese itself was not a big issue. You can see there's only 4% in Ulysses. Enfield, on the other hand, had pretty average results. Nothing of particular concern. You have a question?
Well, I just thought I'd interrupt to just ask the, maybe it's an honest question, but like, they're next door neighbors.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. That's why it's
So what
weird.
is your hypothesis on why? There are
I do touch on it a little bit later on because that's exactly what we thought. When we came here, we're like, wow, what's happening?
Okay, as long as you're gonna talk about it, that's cool.
I don't think we have the answer yet, but we're a little bit closer.
Okay.
But yeah, exactly. That's why, I mean, there's another project we're working on for a conference that we're probably not gonna be able to go to, because once our funding ends, but that's another story. But we were trying to compare these two towns and just examine whatever data we can get and see if there's anything that, is explanatory of all of this. But I ended up, before I get into that. So just because we had a lot of arsenic detections, I think there were only 3 samples that were in excess of the MCL. And MCL's the maximum contaminant level. That's a regulatory term, but it doesn't really apply to private wells, but it's just a good barometer of where you are on the scale of how bad your result is. These are the 3 that were MCL, and everything else you see is really low. This is like 0.0004 to 0.0036 milligrams per liter. So it's really low, but this is just it was a lot more detect. I think 39 is around 70% of wells had a detection for arsenic, which is just not something we usually see. So it's just something to keep an eye on. If you are going to sample your well, it might be good to keep an eye on arsenic. But I think our general recommendation is every 3 to 5 years for stuff like arsenic and all the other stuff we recommend sampling for. And then like bacteria and coliforms once a year, but maybe here it might be a good idea to sample arsenic every year, just to see if it's changing. Okay, so then getting on to comparing Enfield. Okay, that's big enough to read. Comparing Ulysses and Enfield and trying to figure out why we're seeing these different results. So this was just a little bit of analysis I was doing. This is just comparing the coliform results between the 2 towns. And then this is just the results of a chi-squared test, which is a statistical test just trying to determine if the coliform results are independent of each of these things, the town that the samples or the well is located in, the superficial geology of where the well is located, and the bedrock geology. And the smaller this p-value is, the more confidence you can have that they are related, or there is some relation between like town and coliform result, or geology and coliform result. So generally you want to see this p-value below 0.05, and there's only one that was below that, that's superficial geology. And then town 0.07, that's pretty close. I would say that's like approaching significance. There might be a significant difference in coliform positive, or the number of, or the proportion of coliform positive samples in each town, but not quite. So while 40% versus 60% seems significant, at least it did just to us as humans, the statistic says there isn't a significant difference.
Can I ask you a question here?
Yeah.
So what aspects of the surface geology?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, let me talk about bedrock first, because that's not as interesting.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, no relation. You can see this is every location we sampled. Green is coliform negative, red is coliform positive, and no discernible pattern. There were 3 different bedrock geologies where we sampled shale, limestone, and more shale. So you can kind of see, maybe if I had combined shale, because these are technically different, Jacob,
Yeah.
like kind of
Different
shale,
shales,
different shale,
but still shale.
but still shale. Maybe if I combined them, there would have been a significant difference, but more work. So here is the superficial geology. Now this one's definitely more interesting. You can see, so I don't know if I explained this already, but the red is the coliform positive, and the green is, or blue-green is coliform negative. And then this is just represents the proportion and then the counts in each one. So you can see this till has definitely a large proportion of samples that were not coliform positive, that were negative for coliform. And then the sand and gravel and the silt and clay, sand, all had a much larger proportion of coliform positive samples. And you can kind of see it too, this brown, the silt and clay, all of those red samples up there, right? And then in this till, which is one of these pinks, I think it's this one. I did not choose these colors. They're not colorblind friendly. But Yeah, I think it's that, the lighter pink.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, not really. But you can see that one, I mean, there's still some coliform positives in there, but there's a larger portion of coliform negative samples in there. So at this point, I would say this superficial geology is probably playing a role. I've only checked coliform samples or the coliform results based on these, but I have to go back now and check all the other results too, see if there's any correlation there as well. But yeah, I think at this point, I'm gonna hand it over to Pat. Yeah, just to talk about some of the results or some of the analytes we sample for, and just from a public health perspective, why we think some of these things are important.
Yep, so let's give a little kind of like overview going through some of the analytes that we, commonly sample for. So first, the coliform, which Becky talked about before. So commonly found in the environment, in soils, plants, but also in the digestive tract of animals. And so this, can cause nausea, upset stomach, vomiting, diarrhea. But the, main takeaway with coliform is that it's that indicator organism. If the coliform's in there, there could be a disease-causing organism in there or some other kind of substance. It's really showing you that you have a vulnerability in your system and something is getting into it. And so that, no MCL for that, 0 or 1 is too much. And so one quick note too, with these remediations on the bottom, these are kind of like examples of, shock chlorination could work, UV system could work too, but that's more expensive. You might be hamstrung by your finances. So, for all of these remediations on the bottom, it is going to be specific to you and your situation, and also kind of like your means and what you're willing to do with it. We just want to point that out. This isn't like, all inclusive, or this is exactly what we would recommend for that situation. So next is lead. Lead is typically something that you're going to come across when you're dealing with public water systems and the lead service line connections. But it can still be in wells, in like the soldering. There can be, you could have those lead pipes in your home, especially those super old homes, which are common in upstate New York. Typically, you have to remove that source of lead in order to have your water be lead free, but it is very easily able to be remediated just by flushing your cold water tap and letting that water drain out. It significantly reduces the amount of lead that would be in your drinking water.
We do see sometimes just naturally occurring lead in the groundwater, even if there's no lead piping or solid here.
So next, chloride, again, also found in the environment, and then also added in by humans through fertilizers, road de-icers, resulting in the winter. Inconclusive evidence for causing heart and kidney disease, can also lead to digestive tract issues. And this is something that you'd want to take care of with reverse osmosis or deionization typically.
Can I ask you a question about chloride? I think you had some high-ish results in the town of Ulysses, is that right?
Braden would
I
probably
think
know.
there were
It's
just
like 100 and something on your average, but
there's just a few, I think.
there have been, I mean, we have the salt mines, right, under the lake.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I was just curious if that's something that.
We sampled for sodium too, and I don't recall the sodium being too high. But what was the rest of the question?
I guess if you found the chloride results to be exceptional in any way. I know they weren't over the MCL, but
Not
seems
really.
like maybe anecdotally that can be an issue near the lake.
I'll have to take a closer look. I don't think I remember seeing anything that stood out, but I forgot about the salt lines.
So again, as Braden mentioned, turbidity is going to be a measure of the suspended particles that you have in the water. So like the cloudiness of it. That cloudiness, those suspended particles, that's going to most likely interfere with your treatment system, as well as just being unpleasant to look at. And so they measure that in something called NTUs, which is basically just a way to read how cloudy the water is. But anything greater than 5 is going to indicate that you're having some kind of problem with your system, that your water is too cloudy. So for this, we want to take a look at all of your, your whole system, top to bottom, take a look at your house filtration. There's a lot of different kinds of, filtration that you can use. Different pore sizes can get very small. And so that's something that you can easily just kind of get a different smaller pore size for your filter that you already have for your whole house filter. And to get it, checking for water pooling around the wellhead, really kind of doing it top to bottom, seeing if there's anything that looks busted, really.
This is a really commonly treated one. Does anyone here have a whole house filter right after the pressure tank? Yeah, no, just one. Okay. Two. I guess that not that common.
Hardness probably very common. So this is the dissolved minerals in your water that's going to lead to that scaling on all your appliances, your shower fixtures, aerators, that kind of stuff. Reduces the efficiency. I mean, again, like an aesthetic issue, definitely the most common issue we see with wells. And this is almost always a water softener will take care of it.
And I'm gonna roll the dice again. This is another commonly treated one we see. Does anyone here have a softener? Okay, a little better that time.
So nitrates, this is important. These at low concentrations are not harmful to us, but it doesn't take much of increasing the concentration to make it harmful. 1 milligram per liter shows that you have human activity going on. 3 milligrams per liter is like you got a problem, and then 10 or above, that's that MCL. And so this is particularly a problem with babies and pregnant women. It can affect the babies, their blood oxygen levels, and it can lead to blue baby syndrome, which is pretty awful. And this is also something that is generally going to be found from human use, fertilizers, septic tank systems. Really, usually it's a human cause. It's going to be an addition of that nitrate, animals, feeds, farms, that kind of thing.
Interestingly, we haven't seen too much of it in New York. I know we were just at a conference, a private well conference last week, and there was a presentation from Wisconsin, and they have some counties where the average nitrate is like 20 milligrams per liter. So it's an issue in some areas, but we just don't see.
It's really have a lot of limestone and caves and sinkholes and.
Yeah, they have that too.
Yeah,
Farmland.
yeah. So iron and manganese, we spent a lot of time on these already, like Braden mentioned. That combined level of 0.5 is what they use for those. Iron's causing that, rust rust colored, staining on all your fixtures and in your clothes sometimes if it's really bad. The manganese, again, inconclusive evidence, could cause nervous system effects and could lead to behavioral and learning problems with children, but we can't know that for sure. The green sand filters is what a lot of people use, or is pretty common for that iron and manganese. And then also you could take a look at doing a combination of like chlorine and filtering. A lot of times with these in general, it's going to be some kind of combination of treatment methods to fine tune things. So sodium, main component in salt. This really is just something to watch for people who have very low sodium diets or medium low sodium diets. That 20 milligrams per liter is pretty low, but this is something you could do with reverse osmosis. And so here's kind of, it gets at the point of that customization. So this is from the Minnesota Department of Health. And along the side here, we have our contaminant. And along the top, we have our water treatment system. So we got arsenic, boron, fluoride, hard mineral or hard water, lead, nitrate, radon, VOCs. That's going to be your PFAS, PFOA, those kinds of things. On top, activated carbon filtration, reverse osmosis, ion exchange. So this kind of just gets to the point, if your problem is arsenic, you have a lot of different, like on the top row, you have a lot of different options. But if your problem is PFAS or it's radon, you might be very limited to what you can do. So, if you have, this is publicly accessible to the Minnesota Department of Health. So if you wanted to, you could go through and say, oh, I have problems with, lead and arsenic, maybe reverse osmosis is a treatment system for me, but just kind of.
It's a really big document and there's a lot of information in it. There's a link to it on privatewellclass.org and like the more resources section. That's why I found this.
And here is a
Really blurry picture.
this is going to be what your results would look like from the lab when you got your well tested. And so each lab is gonna have their own different version of this. And so it can be kind of intimidating if you have never looked at this stuff before. So what one included is just, to illustrate that complexity, but also if you're having trouble with interpreting this, you could contact us, you could contact private well class, you could contact the local lab here, CSI, and any of us, I'm sure, would be happy to explain and go through and say, oh, this means this means that, that kind of thing. But each of these is going to differ from whatever lab you're using to test to. Like Braden mentioned before, I think Becky did as well. E. coli and coliform bacteria, those you really want to be testing for every year. That's your way to keep your finger on kind of like the pulse of your system. If you don't have coliform bacteria, then a year later you do, something changed, with your system, and that's worth exploring further. These other ones, well, the other thing too with E. coli and coliform versus all those other ones is the cost. E. coli and coliform, you can probably get that done for between $40 and $80 versus the others, which are going to be hundreds of dollars to do that. And so those, it's a good idea to test for every 3 to 5 years just to see, keep your finger on the pulse, but maybe not quite as tight. But it's good to know, whether you have those things. And then if you do have any of those, you might, like Braden said with the arsenic, if you have arsenic, maybe include that in your yearly testing to see if there's any change with that, because each of these samples is only going to be a snapshot in time. So there's going to be variability, there's going to be things that change. So you really won't know, just because you tested it before doesn't mean it's good next year. Something could have happened in that year.
When your neighbor drills a new well and fracks it.
Yeah.
We've seen a couple stories around here where they had good water until their neighbor fracked it and then it changed everything. They had to drill a new well.
Yeah.
See a couple stories about that.
And so that's
It is from our website.
Yep. And then
Pretty much the same thing we just saw.
Braden's going to go through these.
But yeah, that's
QR codes.
another QR code. That brings you to our private well site. And then that's our private well email. If you have any questions or if you missed any links or you want any more information about something we were talking about today, feel free to reach out. And then I think our emails on those brochures too, the Test Your Well brochure up to the front. And then more QR codes. That's the CDC's page on the left for private wells. This is on the right, the private well class, another QR code for the private well class. Private well class is great. And then this middle one is something we haven't talked about at all, but there are a few states that have this Be Well Informed app. And I think Massachusetts, New Hampshire, there's a ton of states, but not New York because we don't have any private well regulations, technically. But what you can do is go to that website, put in all of your private well or your lab results, and if anything's out of range, it'll give you all the treatments you need and in the order you need to install them and how they should be configured. It's actually really useful, and it can give an explanation of your results, like, oh, your sodium is a little bit high, not a big deal unless you're on a salt restricted diet. But yeah, it's a good tool. You just go to that website and pick a state. Most of the the recommended ranges for these contaminants are all pretty similar from state to state. I think some of the weird ones like radionuclides change from state to state, but for the most part, it'll get you pretty close.
And one thing to mention that on when Brandon said technically for New York State well regulations, we do actually have regulations for wells in New York State. There's just nothing set up to enforce them.
Yeah.
So they do exist. It's just they exist in a void. Yeah.
Yeah. It's there's regulations for how it needs to be constructed, and then there's regulations for how it needs to be decommissioned. With one other state that has similar regs that look cradle to grave. That's all we care about it when it's being built and then when it's done.
Does that prevent county or community from trying to have some sort of standards?
Ooh,
I have no idea. I don't know of anybody who tried to do that.
So. I know
There's
there's
some parts of the state where.
some counties that have their own well
You have
programs.
fitting in place through the local health department for the construction of wells. We don't,
Yeah.
that doesn't exist here in Tompkins County, but
I
other
would say
communities. have,
Suffolk, Rockland,
like testing requirements.
Monroe, Madison,
Yeah.
some of those. I think Clinton County used to, but they just lost some people. I think they had to stop all their well work. But there's a couple.
But you can, in the county sanitary code, you can do some things.
That's good. But yeah, I think that's all we got. If we have any questions.
Just shift back to that last slide, yeah, I just want to, I'm old fashioned, I'm just writing it down.
It's in the brochure too, that touch the well brochure.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay. Cool. Here. I mean. Not really, you know. Are we saying some short wells, or just like a really big well right into the, the shore and the water, but they had some pretty good treatment systems. I was drinking.
No, and that's good.
Yeah, I mean, so definitely it's good. It's definitely going to maintaining up to just that water coming in, it's got, let's just start the surface water.
Yeah.
Just gotta be careful. So there's some different stage. You have to go through. You just have to be careful, make sure that it fails.
Water does get cloudy, there's
I've been CSI recommendations.
I'm gonna tell you all about it. Hi, everyone. My name is Grayson Scheidemantel, and I'm the Executive Director of Community Science Institute, or CSI. Thank you for being here. People come to me every single day with questions about their well, and seemingly have never heard anything about wells or well water testing, so it's really good that you're here. For those of you who aren't familiar with Community Science Institute, we're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're also in the State Department of Health Environmental Laboratory Approval Program, or ELAP Certified Water Testing Lab. We're located in Ithaca, New York, but we serve what I like to say the entire Cuba Lake watershed and the surrounding areas. Our mission at CSI is to inspire and empower communities to safeguard their water resources by cultivating scientific literacy through volunteer water quality monitoring, certified laboratory analyses, and education. We have three main types of programming at CSI. The one that a lot of folks in this community know us for is our volunteer water quality monitoring partnerships. We run the Cuba Lake harmful algal bloom monitoring program. We do a monitoring program on Trumansburg and Tagana Creek right here in your neighborhood, and that includes dozens of other tributaries in the Cuba Lake watershed. We also provide outreach and education about water science. We have a great free youth education program each summer. So if you have kiddos in your life, make sure to look us up. And then, of course, what I'm here to talk about today is our fee-for-service water testing side of things. So I did bring a handout that's on that back table if you want this to take home with you so you don't have to memorize everything I tell you. At CSI, we test water from private wells, municipal water systems, swimming beaches, effluents, and more. If you've ever gone swimming at Tagana Falls State Park, that swimming beach water is tested at CSI, so you know it's safe for swimming. At CSI, we're serving a lot of different people. One of our primary clients are residents. So those potability tests for total coliform and E. coli are required for a lot of home sales in New York State. A lot of folks are doing routine testing, like was just talked about by the Department of Health. And also we have folks come to us if they're having any health or taste or water quality concerns. We also help a lot of businesses stay open because many businesses have water testing requirements. So we work with farms, restaurants, breweries, folks who might have small water systems like mobile home parks and apartment buildings. And then, of course, we also partner with government agencies like the Tompkins County. Sorry, Doug, I should update it to Tompkins County Whole Health, New York State Parks, DEC, and Department of Health as well. And I should say that about 50% of our income as an organization comes from this. So if you also care about protecting water quality surface water, like the lake and the tributaries, the revenue we get from this program helps to fund those other programs as well. If you would ever like to have your water tested at CSI, we're open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're right by the Ithaca Airport. We only take water samples Monday through Thursday, 9 to 3. And the reason is that these E. coli and total coliform samples take 24 hours to run. So we don't do them on a Friday. You do need to collect the sample in our sterile water bottles. I've actually brought a few for you all today if you want to take some home or share with your neighbors. Most of you are going to want this bottle with the blue piece of paper wrapped around it. This is a sterile bottle for non-chlorinated systems. So unless you have a chlorination system on your well, which most people don't, every now and again they do, you'll want one of these bottles. You'll need to collect the sample following the sampling instructions on the back of the paper, which I will not review because it's quite tedious. You'll put your sample on ice and deliver it to our lab within 24 hours of collecting the sample. If you didn't want to take a bottle today, or you want to tell a friend where they can get bottles, we do have bottles for pickup at the SureSave in Trumansburg. Also at the Green Star and Cascadilla Street, if you're ever down that way, or of course at our lab at 95 Brown Road. On the back of this sheet, there's a table that lists all of the tests that we perform in-house. I have that reflected up here as well. You'll notice there's some things not on here that you saw in the other presentation. So things like arsenic, manganese, lead. You can still test for those things with Community Science Institute. We just don't perform the test in-house. We send it off to another lab. So it might just take a little bit longer to get your results back versus if you bring a sample directly to us that we test in our lab. There's already been really great information about what you should test your well water for, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. But I will say that diagnosing issues with water quality is really similar to diagnosing an illness. So a lot of times when people come to us, they say, I want to test for everything. And then we have to go through the usual spiel of how much everything is. So what we try to do is help people pick tests that are best suited to their issue. There's routine testing, of course, but we might also diagnose based on issues that they are having with their water, like a weird smell. So say if you go to the doctor complaining of a sore throat, it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to test you for an intestinal parasite, right? So we're going to try to work with you to help you pick tests that will be most appropriate to diagnosing the issues you might be having, because we want to save you time and money. We are a nonprofit. We're not trying to sell people tests that they don't need. Also, an important piece of what we do is outreach and education. So we do have an FAQ page on our website where you can go over common questions like, how do I know if my water is safe for drinking? How can I get it tested? What kind of toxic chemicals might be in my water? We also have a series of handouts. These are sometimes created by us. Sometimes somebody else has already done it really well, so we don't need to duplicate it. And we have it all on one resources page on our website. We also provide referrals for local water treatment specialists. Maybe you are having an issue with hardness and you want to find somebody to install a softener. We can give you some suggestions of folks to reach out to. We do, if people keep failing their potability tests over and over, even after they've shocked, we often say, hey, you should call our friend Becky at RCAP because you're just wasting a lot of money retesting at this point. They might have an issue with the integrity of your well. And then, of course, we also offer expedited results for your basic potability tests in case you need a quicker turnaround time. We do offer a service to our clients where if we detect bacteria in the sample, we do call you the next day as soon as we have the results, because the water would be considered unsafe to drink and we want to keep people safe and healthy. As you'll see on the back of this sheet, there are prices for some of these tests. And we do recognize that these prices are not accessible for everybody. These are the prices that we have to charge so we can pay our staff a fair wage and operate our programming. But we do want to make sure that everybody has access to the results they need about their water testing. So we did recently start a program called the Water Testing Assistance Fund. where we provide discounted drinking water tests to those who otherwise could not afford the cost of testing. And this is just for our in-house tests. Unfortunately, we can't offer that discount on the tests we don't do in-house. So if this is something that would be of interest to you, or if you know somebody in your community who could benefit, please do share this with them. And you don't have to prove eligibility. If you tell me you need it, I believe you, but don't let people take advantage of my kindness. So why do we provide this service at CSI? There is a huge need for this work. Community Science Institute is the only commercial ELAP certified lab in Tompkins County and in the entire Cuba Lake watershed as well. That certification is really important because you could go to Home Depot or Agway and pick up a water test, but those tests don't necessarily have the same level of quality assurance and quality control that you have in a state certified water testing lab. We have to go through biannual rigorous inspections from Department of Health each year, or every other year, excuse me. And I will tell you, it's a lot of work. Becky used to work for us, so she knows it's a lot of work in an inspection year. We also provide education to clients about drinking water resources and recommend testing to fit their specific needs and budget. So like I said before, we're not just trying to sell you tests that you don't need just to make money. And as I mentioned before, it does provide a sustainable source of income for us and helping to fund our free outreach and education programs we offer and our water quality monitoring programs. That's all I have for me today. If you are interested in staying in touch, I have my own QR code today where you can sign up for our monthly email updates. And I'm happy to take questions, or I can hand things over to Doug, who will be.
Teresa, and I will echo that. I travel around the state with RCAP, right? And having a lab at all in a rural area like where we live is a huge asset. But the work that CSI does, and I mean, it's not just a lab, right? I mean, this is a tremendous resource that really does not exist anywhere else in New York State, or arguably the country, but I don't have like firsthand experience with that. But it's really amazing what's going on, and really glad to see that thriving. Our last presenter is Doug Barnes, who is here from Tompkins County Environmental Health, and I'm going to get your presentation up momentarily.
Like the dinosaur QR code.
Working. It's being recorded on.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Okay. Take it away, Doug.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Becky. Thanks, RCAP. So my name is Doug Barnes. I'm from the Tompkins County Full Health. We changed over from the health recently. So yes, Grayson, please get that fixed. But in the Division of Environmental Health, so of course our main focus is public health. And so that covers a wide range of things. A couple of the places I work in with that's why Becky invited me here, was I actually participated in those DWSP2 programs for Cornell, Ithaca, and Boulder Point, the big three surface water purveyors here in the county. But then one of my other roles is I help administer grant funding for septic system replacement. One was through the state, one was through federal grant that Becky actually started. Becky, in her short time on earth here, has been involved in just about everything countywide and now northeast wide. So big and better things. So Becky for president 20. But of course, with our focus being on public health, it's an interesting transition because we certainly can provide assistance with private wells, which isn't necessarily a public health, but when you look at a lot of private wells, you become the public. But then also with septic systems, it's a private septic system, but can certainly impact public health through mainly through surfacing sewage at that point, but certainly can impact groundwater. So that's why we really want to be involved, and we want to be there for the permitting and inspection process to make sure it's installed correctly. So it is a huge investment for you folks when you replace your septic system, but we also want to make sure it lasts as long as possible. So you'll see from us, septic system is certainly the most common term, but we like to call it an on-site wastewater treatment system, just because we like to be fancy and feel better about ourselves. But it's because there's a lot more involved with it. So I just wanted to give you a brief.
Arrows, should they? We'll turn it off. Where's the console?
No, that's right. I can stand here. Or you get a one slide presentation. There we go. Okay, so I just wanted to really cover what our role is in helping you kind of start the process. And luckily, once you get it started, for the most part, your contractor and us, we kind of take it from there. So your involvement can be as little as possible, just to ease things. So I'm going to kind of talk about the permitting part, what happens once we kind of get it back in the office. I don't really like to talk about cost much, but it is a reality. And then very briefly, kind of some do's and don'ts, just to help make sure that your system's going to last you as long as possible. So you don't have to replace it, and it will limit any impacts on groundwater. So really what it comes down to is you're going to just want to apply through our office, and there's several different ways to do that. Ooh. So you can come in, if you're old school like me, you want to do things in person, just come right up to our office. We're at 55 Brown Road, right next door to CSI. So you can do that, or you can go to our website, and there's a couple different ways. If you still want to do it semi old school, you can actually just fill out, print it, mail it to us, and or you can actually do it online. If you really want to be in 2025, you can just put it right through that way, and it will be the fastest, of course, doing it that way. At that point, this is where things kind of get a little bit confusing, because people wait for us to call them at that point, but we don't know if you're actually ready. You know, some people fill out an application and they're like, well, I want to kind of do some other things first. So what you want to do is either you or your contractor will call us and schedule a time for our field member to go out and do their site evaluation. I kind of recommend just having a contractor, it doesn't need to be the contractor, but have a contractor kind of lined up to get things started. They can call and schedule the time if you don't want to kind of be in the middle of it and things. But it's on you or your contractor to give us a call and get moving after you've filled out the application. From there, we have to kind of do what's called a soil profile. And so we want to know what kind of soils we're working with, because like Becky was pointing out, there's all sorts of different things you can find under the surface, and depending on what's there is really going to drive what kind of system you're going to need. Because we need to know whether it's really all clay, which is, like she said, mostly what we have around here, or if it's kind of gravelly or sandy. But we also need to know how deep it is to bedrock or the water table, because that's going to really drive what kind of system you're going to need. We need to do a perk test or percolation test, see how quickly the water can absorb into the soil, because the funny thing is if it's really sandy, that's not good, because all of that effluent from your system can go into the ground too quickly. And not give the soil time, the bacteria there, to actually process the water. If it doesn't perk fast enough, then it just sits there and it'll cool up and surface, and that's bad too. So we want that perfect rate of sinking fast enough, but not too fast. So we really need to figure out what's going to happen. But if the soil test showed, or the soil profile just shows all clay, we don't really need to bother with that, because we know what's going to happen at that point. So here's the perk test. They just dig another hole, put some water in it, see how quickly it goes down. You get to, how long, Becky, do you get to stand
Oh,
there?
it's a thrilling process. Water soak into the ground.
Paint dry, water soak in.
Yeah.
That's what we do at EA.
And sometimes it's fast though. If it's too fast, you gotta keep up with your bucket.
Good exercise. So yeah. So really what we do then at that, from the site evaluation, our team members will come back to the office. They'll design what they think would be best. And we do have an in-house public health engineer that does the final review of that, just to make sure it fits all local and state codes. Very few counties actually have that. Most of them, people have to pay for outside engineers to do that. And so we provide that as just part of our permitting fee. So that's kind of a service the county could provide to folks. So really what I'm going to cover next, Becky did a great job talking about kind of what we call a conventional system, septic tank, some sort of absorption bed, leach field, whatever you want to call it. Please, if you think you have a cesspool, anything like that, let us know. Those are really bad. But unfortunately, with the kind of soils we have around here, or whether you're really close to the lake, or you have very little soil, or you're very close to the bedrock, most people don't get this. We get a modified version of this. And so, like I said, if your soil perks very slowly, or you're close to a well, a stream, a lake, a wetland, guess what? One of the joys of living in Tompkins County is we have all of those beautiful things, but they do create some parameter challenges for us. And some people have incredibly small lots that they live on. So that means you're close to your well, your neighbor's well, the stream, very constrained with what we can build. So what we have to do then is basically create a system, a setup that will do what a conventional system would do just within these parameters. So what you might get is what you can call it an ATU, an ETU, an IA system, which is innovative and advanced. But mostly what they're trying to do is just, we want nature to do as much of the work as possible in these systems. So if you add air to your septic tank, what that allows is oxygen-loving bacteria to start doing a lot of the extra breakdown in the tank. A normal tank doesn't do that. There's no air going in there, or very little. So those the bacteria you have in there does some of the breakdown, but not much. So if we can start the process early, that's even better. The challenge here is that it's a special kind of tank. You have to wire it to your home. It requires electricity, so there is going to be extra cost there. We do require you to have a service contract with that, so which means that somebody has to come out and inspect it and do maintenance every year, just to make sure it's doing its job, because it gives us a chance to put it on a smaller footprint for your home. So if the aerobic part isn't working, then you're flooding your absorption area with stuff that hasn't been treated the way it was supposed to. So that's why we want you to have that contract there. Most commonly, we end up doing what's called a sand filter, and really that's just allowing us to create soil, if you will. We have engineered soil or spec sand and gravel mix that goes into there that creates just the right perk rates and a lot of surface area for that the effluent after the tank to be able to percolate through there, allow the bacteria to do all of its breaking down of eating the viruses and breaking down all of the organic materials. And then there's a pipe on the bottom that allows it to go out to some sort of dispersion trench or field. So it's kind of just creating a soil area because your soil wasn't good enough or deep enough. If you're one of the really unlucky ones, we try to avoid this as much as possible, but you get what we call the dead whale in your backyard. I just got to actually go check one out the other day because the lady had one installed and she thought she was getting septic smell from it. But these ones are when you have very little soil to work with. And so what we just need to do, instead of digging down, we have to go up. So we actually bring in a whole bunch of soil and material and create basically a sand filter on top of your yard. So instead of having your nice flat yard, you now have a giant hump in the back. So I don't know where to go from there. Thank you. So, but we try to avoid doing that as much as possible, because clearly that is not what people want to see in their backyard and have to work around. But sometimes that's what we're limited to. So again, cost is kind of unfortunate, but even with doing the two different grants that I've been able to work with here, with the CDBG one, which did help eligible households that were income eligible, that covered 100% of costs. Right now, we still have DEC and EFC funding for properties that are within 250 feet of the lakeshore, upper 6 Mile Creek and lower Fall Creek. That covers up to 50% or 10,000. So it's certainly helpful. But just in the last 3 to 4 years that we've been doing this, we've seen costs go up anywhere from, like, on average 7,000 to 10,000 for these systems, just because of material costs, fuel costs for the contractors, and everything else. And so they're right around 20 to 40,000, depending on how challenging your site is. There were some that were on the lake. You had to actually put the excavator on a barge and get it to the house, and then trying to get all the materials. They were pushing 50 to 60,000. So it very quickly can get cost prohibitive.
So we certainly do our best to try to work with you and do what's best for you, but also for the public health and the safety of our water.
That's, is that second one income eligible as well?
It's, that is just location. Yep. So, if you think you might be eligible, what that does is they flag that in the front office, they let me know, and I go through and check on GIS where you're at, do some measurements to make sure that if you're in distance, but then there's also some other eligibility requirements like age and site failure and stuff like that. So, this will just be really quick. You can go over a lot. For main dues, only flush 1 and 2s. That's really the only thing that should be going down your system, nothing else. Now, of course, the reality is you do use cleaning products and stuff. And so normal average use, you know, is going to be fine. Because again, we want biology to do its thing. Natural body organisms, bacteria that you're flushing down the system, they are going to provide all of the action we need down in that septic system. So a lot of people are like, well, but there's this product that I saw that they guarantee, you know, they pour it as a powder and it's enzymes and bacteria. You're providing that naturally already, right? So I don't think it hurts anything. I don't think there's evidence to show that it hurts, but it's just, Becky is nodding vigorously.
Well, the specifically Ridex type products are designed to take solids and break them into tiny pieces. And so that makes them leave your tank and get stuck in your absorption area. So that is very harmful. The more like, you know, seed your tank kind of things, I mean, it's a waste of money, but it might not harm it. You skip it.
Yeah, exactly. You just don't need to. EPA recommends having your tank pumped every 3 to 5 years if you're somebody that likes to throw a lot of parties or your Airbnb a lot. And so your system should be designed a number of bedrooms, right? And so if you're somebody that has extended family and so you have 10 people per bedroom, you want to really think about that because you could be overloading the system with much more material than it's designed to. And so you'd want to have that pumped much more often and inspected then. Again, have those ETUs inspected yearly and only plant grasses around the system. Anything with deeper roots can very easily infiltrate those pipes and things, and because they really like those nutrients, they really like that water, and it can cause havoc. The don't side should really be saying whatever, if it's not over on the do, don't, right? I could go on and on. I did make a little demonstration in the back where I put some toilet paper in a water bottle and a flushable wipe. If it fits down the toilet, it's flushable. But you know, the Matchbox cars that my kids flush down, they're not flushable, right? They did go down, but the guy's gonna suck them out here whenever he comes to pump our tank. So they just don't break down. They build up in the tank. They can plug up the machinery when they pump it. They can plug up when it goes to the wastewater treatment plant. So they're not necessary. You can use them, but just throw them in the garbage, right? That's the best place for them. Oils and greases, natural amounts are going to go down. They're going to float to the top. It's going to be our scum layer in the tank. And that's going to be normal. And that gets pumped out when you pump the tank. But any large amounts then are going to block your plumbing, but then they can also leak out, plug the leach field area. So you want to be careful there. Again, harsh cleaners are going to kill the bacteria that's down in the tank. So you want to avoid doing large amounts of those. Again, anything with the big roots, and try to avoid driving, parking over it. It's very easy to forget where it's at, or you just want people to park out in the yard if you're having a big party, but all that weight can certainly crush things. So, and compact the soil, and so it can't perk as well as it should. So again, if it's not on the do side, just let it do its thing. Think, is it? Yeah. So again, we are just a phone call away. We can answer questions for private wells too. We can be a resource there if you need it. But I did leave some business cards in the back. So if you want to contact us for anything, just.
Sorry, I have one more question.
Sure.
So I live in Ulysses. I walk a particular road, I'm not gonna name it, not gonna name and shame anybody. I walk a road regularly
Yes.
where there's a scent of sewage, possibly a leaking septic. You don't smell it all the time, you listen sometimes. I have no idea which person it is, you know, there's just no way to know for sure. All I'm saying is, if there is that sort of regular situation, is there anything you guys do about that? Do you just let it go?
Oh, no, we rely heavily, we rely on people narking on their neighbors. It's all anonymous, but you can certainly let us know if you happen to notice particular times, like say maybe when it's raining a lot. Yes. let us know. And usually what'll happen then is our guys have certain particular areas that they cover. And so they're out here all the time anyway, so they'll probably stop and just start sniffing around. And as long as we have our badge on, we can go on people's property and check things out if we suspect something. But yeah, surfacing is certainly one of our main concerns because it can spread much more easily. Yeah, so and it's unfortunate that one of the biggest expenses you'll ever have owning a home is invisible underground, so you drop $40,000 and it's, you can brag about it, no new roof, look at my roof, but you can't brag about a septic. But if they're failing, the only way we really know is if it's surfacing or it's backing up the home. So if you do notice, we really like it to know about it.
Okay.
Yep. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is there a good way? So I bought my house like 3 years ago. Is there a good way to know where my leach field is? Is that on file somewhere with you or someone else?
What year is your home?
It's in Ulysses near the lake.
What year is it? How old is it?
It was built in the 30s, I want to say.
Ooh. Well, I'm gonna redact what I was about to say.
It's been replaced.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, you hope.
Yeah, you hope.
Right, yeah, because there's been a couple recently that we didn't have file from that age, but there's always a chance. So yes, if you want to know, certainly can give us a call and we'll look it up and we can let you know. You can get a rough idea depending on the shape of your property. If you kind of know where the pipe's leaving your basement, sometimes it goes that way, but sometimes it goes down and hangs a big right or a left. So it is tough.
Or the
to tell.
granular puppet.
Yeah, right. That's
That worries me because that means.
Well,
up,
I know.
down,
Right. I
Yeah.
agree. We
So,
just
yeah.
been replaced.
Right, yes, yeah. So no, just give us a call. We can chat.
Yeah, I'm just curious about lakeshore cottages and, they don't have a lot of soil down there, do they? And they're right on the. So what's the norm for the older cottages there in terms of septic systems?
Whatever they could fit in at the time.
So I worked for environmental health for 7 years before coming to RCAP, and I covered the town of Ulysses for septic permits. So if you don't mind, that I can answer this question. But I mean, the reality is a lot of them most of them even are unknown and probably are something extremely substandard. I think straight pipes directly to the lake with no tank at all is rare.
Yeah.
It definitely exists, but I would say it's rare. What's more likely is that there's some kind of tank that is doing some amount of settling, and that may be the only meaningful treatment.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other challenge down there is there's a lot of fill.
Yeah.
So if you have a house that's lakeshore, I remember I did some perk tests down at the lake one day, and that was a lovely place to spend some time watching water soak in the ground, except it was super fast, right? Because the house and their so-called yard, right, was what it really probably should be underwater or under normal conditions, but enough material had been brought in, but it was all mixed, gravel from this or that or the other building project, and there wasn't any like soil structure to work with. So they had to bring in a bunch of new material and just build, pump. So anyone that's trying to do it right, that's lakeshore, unless they have an unusual lot with some kind of frontage, you're gonna be in a bad way. The truth, it's extremely challenging.
What do you do?
And the narrowness of those lots is
so what
also
do
a real challenge.
Yeah.
That's when we highly encourage those ETUs.
Yeah.
Just because that allows a lot more treatment plus a smaller footprint. You can't make anybody, of course, but most people are understanding.
Yeah.
It's not as big of a, you don't see that big of as big of a jump in the cost.
Yeah.
I mean, has there been consideration of some like kind of neighborhood scale? So that, you would have maybe there's somebody like 4 houses down that has a larger lot and could handle, like, could there be shared systems? Does anybody even look at shared systems?
The trouble with that then is like who's.
Yeah,
But
Right.
yeah, just seems like that's a safer option.
We one of the other options we always are encouraging the county to do and stuff is expand, especially at the lake municipal, access to municipal.
Sewage,
Yeah.
sewage system.
Yeah.
And
So it's tricky for sure.
Mm,
All right, well, thank you, everybody.
thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for coming out today. Again, we really appreciate you all being here, and thank you so much to all of our presenters. I think this was a really excellent overview of water quality, private wells, and our local resources. Please reach out to any of us anytime. I'll just volunteer that for the other folks here. But I do think that's true. There's pamphlets and things like that. Have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, just the trash.